It's the late 80s. A small group of university students gather around their one VHS copy of a film. It's a film that's found its way across the ocean for a rare showing in the West. These people are about to experience a film that's influence will stretch further than any of them could imagine. This film is Akira. It was about to send a ripple throughout the West and spark a revolution within the fandom. It had already shaken Japan, and it was about to do the same for fans all over the West. Akira was about to shake an economy, redefine genres, it was about to change a medium. It was about to transform this into this. I feel like I don't need to give Akira much of an introduction. It's a very well known title in and out with the medium. It's not a rare occurrence for people to discover Akira before they really know what Japanese animation is. Along with it just being generally awesome with enormous scale and captivating imagery, Akira is as important and influential as it is artistically impressive, arguably more so than any other anime. So in this video I'll be exploring the various influences Akira has had on both Japanese and Western media, and seeing how those influences have evolved throughout the years. Before we look at Akira, we have to look at the industry building up to Akira, the 80s. The 80s was a fascinating decade for anime. It was a time of experimentation and progression, and possibly one of the most progressive decades the medium has seen, considering the amount of change that occurred year by year. The early 80s saw the rise in popularity of shows like Gundam and Macross. This kind of set the scene for the sci-fi dominated decade. A few years later we come to the mid-80s, here Studio Ghibli were founded along with an era of largely funded and groundbreaking movies. Releases like Nausicaa and Royal Space Force just fueled the industry's progression and hunger for bigger projects. From here on out, this pot of big movies and science fiction would boil and boil until 1988. This sort of one-upmanship that was happening with film companies was allowing the biggest scale and budgets anime had ever seen. And then along came Akira. With an already sizable manga following, the movie was given a budget of 1.1 billion yen. And Katsuhiro Otomo, the manga's author, was given a huge amount of creative control, and this was one of the vital reasons the film could be made to such scale. Otomo could put into one scene what some anime projects could put into one entire episode, and this never really happened before. Movies to this scale had to be very specifically formulated, or had to have one of the big names like Miyazaki behind them. Regardless of how incredibly impossible the production of Akira should have been, it happened and it was completed, and this had a huge impact on the industry. Akira's release is sometimes considered a flop, which is kind of true, but at the same time kind of not true. Akira made a lot of money, more than most anime films at the time did, but as much money as it would make, it was just a scratch on the money put into the project initially. It was an impossible task to make back that 1.1 billion yen. Akira had raised the bar to an impossible height. Anime movies were just not going to receive that kind of funding, which was needed to create something of that scale. These last few years in the industry were just improvements upon improvements, so you're probably wondering what happened next, because it took almost half a decade for the industry to start producing works that came even close to Akira. Well, Akira ate up a lot of money and ended up closing down a lot of companies attached to the project, which was a similar case for many other previous movies. So people just stopped wanting to fund these projects that had almost no chance of making that money back. And as if written in a play, the Japanese economy crashed at the end of the decade, and it took the industry with it. Now no one wanted to go anywhere near anime with their money. So in a sense, Akira was a big part of why the industry took a big slump after the 80s. There was no money in the industry and people's bars had been raised too high. It took years for the industry to recover, but the whole time Akira was having a different effect. Not only did it have economic ripples within the industry, but stylistically it was pushing the medium in a whole new direction. If we look at everything Akira took, changed and created, we can see it being implemented into almost every sci-fi anime project over the next decade. And you can see how it evolves. There's a nice distinct pattern which is really interesting to look at. So Akira championed a very distinct visual style, mixing the bright lights of science fiction with a dark, gritty dystopian city. This mixture of neon lights and stained alleyways was very iconic and set the scene for so many future titles. I think this worked so well because it struck such a realistic chord. The city of Akira was so realistic, yet it carried so many elements of a dark, undesirable world. I think the bar scene, for example, encapsulates this perfectly. You only have to look forward a few years to see how shows started emulating this style. So let's actively look at how Akira's influence evolved over the years. The first wave of anime Akira really had its hands in would be the early 90s, shows like Patlabor and Giant Robo. My favourite example was the second Patlabor movie in 1993. Akira not only utilises the city elements, but gives a city an overwhelming characteristic, something that engulfs the environment. Instead of neon lights and grime, it's metallic textures and snow. It's not as easy to notice with Patlabor, but it's very obvious in shows like Giant Robo. Unfortunately, the economic problems I mentioned caused there to be a real lack of of anime during this period, so we don't get an amazing representation of Akira's influence, but we do during the mid-90s. Anime skyrocketed in the mid-90s, with productions like Evangelion, Ghost in the Shell, and Macross Plus. All these shows continued on the wave that Akira released with their gritty, reality-driven sci-fi stories. It's also where the influence starts to move on in different directions, and it's quite interesting to see different works pick up different elements. Eva, for example, took both the darker approach of Akira and the more classic mech-orientated elements from the late 70s and early 80s. Ghost in the Shell continued down the path of works like Patlabor with their realistic and heavily thematic stories, also carrying on the focus of detail and intricate designs. Works like Macross Plus and Memories use the more traditional aesthetic, but applying modern technical elements. Many scenes from Macross Plus could have quite easily been picked out of Akira, which was only possible because of the technologies becoming available at the time. Towards the late 90s you see Akira's influence evolving into what we know as anime today. The styles and techniques birthed by Akira had a decade to flourish, resulting in works like Bebop and Outlaw Star, and then moving into the early 2000s where the amount of anime explodes. The further you go, the deeper you need to look to find Akira's influence, but it's always there. Even drastically different shows like Serial Experiments Lain have Akira in their blood. Akira not only had a substantial effect on the industry, but it was very important over here in the West too. It was one of the first releases to come over here and really make a buzz around an almost unknown medium. For most people it was their first taste of anime, and it offered a kind of maturity that wasn't widely available in Western animation. I feel like it appealed to the style of movies like Blade Runner, a style that would just increase in popularity over the coming years. But it jump-started a love for Japanese anime in the West and became a domino effect for the rest of the medium to come over. Shows like Macross and Gundam would make their way over, having been missed in the 80s, Cowboy, Bebop and Eva would expand the popularity even further. Akira is quite possibly the birthplace of the West's love for Japanese animation. Akira was certainly one of my most memorable early experiences with anime, and I still have the DVD set I first watched it on. But I'd be interested to hear everyone else's first experiences with the film. I'm sure they're all very different. So please do leave a comment telling me about yours. And thank you for watching the video. I hope I gave a good enough rendition of Akira's influence. If you feel I did, please do click the like button and share it around. And if you want, you can click the subscribe button to be notified for new videos. Cheers.